It's done. I just finished what I consider to be the quintessence of a DAWless recording project. I performed a bounce. Well, actually, 5 bounces because I have 5 songs that I'm working on at the same time. This isn't especially novel. I mean, I work in multi-trackers all the time. But these 5 bounces were special. And not only because I was doing them without the safety net of digital features that I've gotten used to in devices like Tascam's Model 12. No, the truth is these were more than just bounces, because as part of my tussle with the track limitations of the 424 Portastudio that I'm using, and out of a desire to make this recording project as efficient as possible, I decided to also record a new sound, a new track, onto the same track onto which I was performing this bounce. Let me explain what I mean. When you're working in a device like this one and you fill up most but not all of your available tracks and want to make room for more recording, you perform what's commonly called a bounce or a ping pong if you're following the parlance of Tascam's manuals. An ordinary ping pong bounce would involve taking, say, the sounds from these first 3 tracks and recording those recorded sounds onto track 4. In that instance, you're really just performing a mix. It just happens to be an intermediate mix that you have to make along the way to finishing your song. But you can do more than just mix when you're performing a bounce. You could plug in another sound source, like a bass guitar, and perform and record a new part with that sound at the same time that you're performing the bounce. And not just at the same time, but onto the same track, so that when the dust settles, you have on one track not only the recorded things that you've been bouncing, but also mixed in with them the sound that you just recorded fresh. This is what a successful bounce sounds like. You could skip the step of adding a new sound and instead record that new sound on one of the tracks that you're making available by performing a bounce. That is, in a way, the safest and most conservative approach, and the one I normally use. But in my mind, there are 2 downsides. The first is after recording that new sound to a now available track, you've got fewer extra tracks available for further recording. And all that means is that you're going to be on the doorstep of another bounce sooner than if you do what I've been doing tonight. And that might be a problem because generation loss is a thing when you are recording with cassette multitrackers. All that means is that as you perform more bounces of the same sounds, you lose some fidelity and detail in those sounds that you are continuing to bounce. That mattered to me in this particular project because I knew doing this, recording a sound at the same time as a bounce, would free up exactly the number of tracks that I need to record the remaining sounds that I imagined for this project. But that works only if I record the bass at the same time as this bounce. If I don't, then after the bounce, I still have 4 things that I want to record, and only 3 or maybe 2 available tracks. 2 tracks available if I want to perform another internal bounce in this machine. 3 tracks available if I'm willing to fill up the tracks in the Portastudio and then perform an external bounce. In both of those cases, I'm looking toward another bounce. And if I did an external bounce, I might be able to bounce to a medium that wouldn't create that much generation loss on its own, but to continue recording, I've got to bring it back into the tape, which will essentially induce generation loss. So I found myself thinking, wow, I really need to commit to 1 or 2 extra layers of generation loss, or I need to muster the courage to just record bass at the same time that I perform these bounces. And after much deliberation, I decided to do the latter. But it was not an easy decision, for a few reasons. First, it meant that I had to do a lot more preparation before recording the bass, because the sound that entered the device through this cord, through this channel strip, would be the final sound that ended up in this bounced track, with absolutely no room for adjustment without adjusting the sound, volume, whatever, of the other things that I had bounced. And normally that wouldn't bother me because I know how to get sounds that at least I'm going to be happy with. But it wasn't just a matter of getting the sound, it was a matter of getting the sound and setting the levels, like the input levels on this device, such that it sat in the mix exactly the way I wanted it to. Contrast that with the normal process, which would involve me trying to record the bass in a way that makes it sound as good as possible, and then using the level fader and the other controls on the 424 to set it in the mix after the fact. And that proved very challenging, especially when I was trying to record like a live sound through an amplifier in a tiny shed in the same place where I was halfway trying to monitor the other sounds in this device. I could hear the sound of the bass in the room, obviously. It's a tiny room, and it made it very hard for me to sense and calibrate like what the volume of the bass was really relative to the other elements of this bounce mix. For a while, I tried to go with it anyway and just used like the metering in the 424 as a guide. But that involved a lot of trial and error, and I wasn't really getting anywhere. And so I decided to make a compromise by recording the bass direct so that there is no external live sound in the room. I only heard the sound of the bass as it came through this cable and into this machine and out of the machine into my headphones. That made it much easier for me to just mix the bass in advance of performing the part. But then before I could really get to work, I ran into another problem sort of unique to cassette or other analog machines. At the risk of stating the obvious, tape machines turn the tape at a very particular speed in order to play back and receive recordings of sounds at the pitches that you're expecting. And the mechanisms that control that are not immune to outside forces. And I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it was changes in the wall voltage. Maybe it was just stretching of the tape. Maybe one of my kids played with the pitch wheel when I wasn't around. But when I sat down to record bass tonight, pitch wheel dead center, like where I had it when I recorded the other parts of this project, it did not reproduce the sound at its original speed and pitch. What does that mean? Well, it means that when I sat down to record bass for the first song, which I expected to be in the key of C, really A because I've tuned down my instruments, but I tuned my bass the way I normally would, like to 440, and I played notes and they were super sharp, not even close to the right pitch. And that left me with a serious problem. I mean, what was I supposed to do? Tune my bass to the pitch of the recorded sounds? I tried that and it did not go well. So instead I tuned my bass back to standard 440 and adjusted the pitch and speed of what I had recorded by turning the pitch wheel. It wasn't very exact or scientific. I literally just turned the wheel a little bit to speed up the tape, played some notes on my bass, and repeated the process until I felt like the notes on the bass were in tune with the recording. I'm sure there's a way that I could have checked whether the recorded sounds were at 440, but I don't know what that way is. So I just had to go with my gut and my own sense of pitch, which is sometimes a little shaky. And then at that point, with my bass plugged in DI, sounding in tune-ish, I had to, write and execute parts. Somehow I did it. I got through all 5 songs over the course of a few hours tonight, but not necessarily unscathed. There are errors in the bass parts. In order to fix those errors, I would have had to do each of the bounces / new recordings and performances again, basically from the top. And I know from experience that sometimes when you're 95% of the way there, it can take 10 more takes before you get to 100%. Believe it or not, I'm being conservative here. In fact, on one of my recent songs called I Don't Care About You, I was recording the guitar solo. I got a solo that was 95% there and decided I wanted to get it the extra 5%. And it probably took 20 more takes. Not fun and disappointing when I went back and watched some footage that I had taken on my phone and listened to that original solo, and I was like, oh my god, that was definitely good enough. And I just didn't really have time or energy for that, and honestly, I don't know if it would have been that great for the tape because it's a physical medium and continued use like that does affect it. So I had real incentives to be efficient and to live with recordings that were just good enough. But honestly, they were good enough. I'm being kind of hard on myself. There were some particular moments where I rushed a note or like dropped a note. But overall, I'm really happy with my playing and with the parts that I had written. I'm hopeful that in the end, it all becomes part of a larger mix and the little errors aren't really noticeable. And now I'm excited to move on to that, to recording the final pieces that are going to make this sound exactly the way I want it to sound. I have 3 parts left to record: a lead vocal and 2 tracks of electric guitar. And I have 3 tracks available on all 5 of these songs, ready and waiting for whatever I'm gonna do. But I feel like I've overcome a serious obstacle tonight, because with any luck, tonight was the first and last set of bounces that I will perform on this project. And I won't have to mix again until I am performing the final mix down and wrapping up this EP. So I hope you'll tune in for updates and videos related to the remaining steps in the project. And I hope you'll tell me what you think of this update in the comments. And for those interested in what it sounds like when you bounce 3 recorded and 1 new instrument down onto a single track, I'm going to put a very crude representation of one of these songs in its current form at the end of this video. If you listen to that, I hope you enjoy it. And as always, thank you so much for your time. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you around. Before we go, let us pay tribute to these fallen soldiers who kept the heads clean and the recordings clear throughout tonight's work.